There is a vast difference between a country and a civilization. A country can be shaped by policy, created by borders, and limited by time. But a civilization is birthed in identity, forged in continuity, and fueled by memory. When the West looks at India, it often sees only the country, its policies, its politics, its present. But it misses the deeper truth. India is not a new nation, it is an old soul. A living, breathing civilization whose roots run deeper than any political structure, whose wisdom predates empires, whose culture has survived colonization, invasions, and ideological warfare. This is why it cannot be defeated. Because you cannot defeat what does not die. You cannot destroy what regenerates from within. India is not simply rising, it is remembering. And when a civilization begins to remember who it is, what it was, and what it's meant to be, it enters a realm of unstoppable motion. The power of memory is stronger than missiles. The force of identity is more potent than any foreign strategy. The West's strength lies in innovation, in control, in dominance through systems. But India's strength lies in its ability to absorb, adapt, survive, and still stand with a smile. That smile is not weakness. It is warning. It says, we have seen this before, and we are still here. Conquest, historically, has never been about land alone. It has always been about the erasure of memory. Take away a people's story, and you control their future. But India's story cannot be deleted. It's etched in its temples, sung in its scriptures, danced in its rituals, woven into its art, and breathed through its language. Every time a child recites the Gayatri mantra, every time a village lights a diya, every time a teacher shares the Mahabharata or a student quotes Vivekananda, the soul of India resists colonization. And the West, with all its might, has never truly understood this, because it's not used to dealing with a force that doesn't need validation to thrive. You can defeat armies. You can dismantle institutions. You can manipulate media, but you cannot defeat a people who know who they are. India's greatest shield is not its military, it is its memory, a collective consciousness that reaches back thousands of years and forward through every generation. This consciousness cannot be bought, borrowed, or broken. It is taught through lineage, passed in whispers and rituals. It sits in the silence of the Himalayas and roars in the energy of Kumbh Mela. It is the Vedic vibration beneath the noise of modernity. And when that vibration is awakened, it shakes off every shackle, mental, political, or spiritual. The West has always approached the world with the lens of conquest. Its empires expanded by erasing the names of the past and replacing them with monuments of their own making. But when they came to India, something shifted. They could colonize the government, control the economy, even influence the education system. But the spirit of the people remained intact. It was wounded, yes, but it was never surrendered. Even when the flag changed, the flame never did. And now that flame is rising again. Not in anger, but in awakening, not in revenge, but in remembrance. This remembrance is not romanticism. It is strategic. It is what gives India its resilience in the face of adversity. Every time the global economy shifts, India adapts. Every time political pressure mounts, India absorbs. Every time its sovereignty is questioned, India responds. Not with desperation, but with dignity. Because its foundation is not new, it is ancient. Its institutions may have been built yesterday, but its soul was carved before most nations even existed. And a soul that old does not fear temporary turbulence. The West struggles with this reality because it is used to quick influence, buy the media, fund the politics, shape the curriculum, dictate the narrative. But India resists this not with aggression, but with ancient wisdom. It does not react violently, it responds wisely, it does not conform, it contextualizes, it knows that not all power is loud. Some of the deepest forces in the universe move in silence, like gravity, like time, like India. India's ability to carry complexity is another reason it cannot be conquered. The West often tries to reduce nations into binaries, right or left, east or west, developed or developing, but India refuses to fit into these boxes. It is secular and spiritual, ancient and futuristic, chaotic and organized, soft and strong. It holds multitudes without contradiction. That confuses those who are trained to see only in straight lines. But India flows like a river, twisting, turning, but always moving forward. And rivers don't need permission to shape landscapes. They just flow. Even when India is criticized, misunderstood, or misrepresented, it does not stop. It does not collapse under the weight of foreign judgment, because it is not building its destiny on borrowed definitions. It is building it on timeless truths, truths that have survived not because of global alliances, but in spite of them. Truths that are not taught in foreign think tanks, but are felt in every Indian village, spoken in every mother tongue, and lived by every person who carries the rhythm of Bharat in their bones. This is why India is the one country the West cannot defeat. Because it is not trying to become the West. It is trying to become itself again, and that process is unstoppable. A civilization that remembers who it is doesn't just resist colonization. It reverses it. It reclaims its voice, its vision, and its values, and that reclamation becomes a light that the world cannot dim, distract, or deny. There is a kind of power the world is used to fearing, a loud, centralized, iron-fisted rule that dominates through force and fear. That kind of power is easy to recognize. It marches in uniforms, broadcasts propaganda, silences dissent, and claims victory through submission. But there is another kind of power that is far more enduring, more unpredictable, and ultimately more indestructible. It is the power of a disciplined democracy, a nation where the people are free but focused, where choice is not a distraction but a direction, where diversity is not chaos but creative power, and India stands as the world's living example of that truth. India is the world's largest democracy, not just in numbers but in conviction. Its democracy is not imported, it is inherited. It did not start in 1947, it was revived then. From the ancient sabhas of Vedic times to the Janapadas that practiced public debate long before modern republics were formed, India's democratic instinct is civilizational. It understands dialogue, it understands disagreement, but it also understands duty. And when democracy becomes wedded to duty, it becomes a force that no external pressure can bend. The West has always believed that its systems are the pinnacle of governance. But India is showing that democracy, when rooted in values and backed by discipline, becomes more resilient than any Western framework. In Western democracies, freedom often becomes entitlement. In India, freedom is still seen as responsibility. That difference creates a new kind of citizen, one who argues with passion but defends the nation with even greater commitment, one who celebrates individual rights but does not forget collective purpose. That kind of citizen cannot be programmed. That kind of nation cannot be defeated. What makes India's democracy even more powerful is its ability to organize itself without losing its soul. It can absorb 1,000 languages, hundreds of ethnicities, all major religions, countless political opinions, and still move in one direction when it matters. That is not an accident. That is a miracle of civilization. And the West, despite all its power, cannot replicate that, because it tries to engineer what India naturally embodies, unity without uniformity. In times of global pressure, be it economic sanctions, geopolitical threats, or media manipulation, India does not fracture. It fortifies. Its people may argue on television, but when the nation is challenged, they stand together without instruction. That's not dictatorship, that's discipline. The discipline of knowing that freedom without responsibility is self-destruction. The discipline of knowing that disagreement is not disloyalty, The discipline of knowing that a nation is greater than any one leader, one party, or one ideology. This is why the West cannot defeat India. Because it doesn't understand a democracy that doesn't implode. It doesn't understand a freedom that doesn't fragment. It doesn't understand a system that survives both criticism and crisis. India's political chaos may look confusing from afar, but within it lies a rhythm, a pulse, a structure that moves like a vast ecosystem, alive, adaptive, and deeply anchored in its people's values. Even India's protests are a reflection of its democratic power. People take to the streets not because the system is weak, but because the people believe their voices can shape it. And when that belief exists across 1 billion people, you have a nation that cannot be dominated, only engaged with. You cannot push a country into submission when every citizen believes they are a stakeholder in its soul. India's elections, despite being the largest and most complex in human history, are conducted with remarkable credibility. That is not just a technical feat, it is a moral statement. It says we may be vast, but we are vigilant. We may be diverse, but we are deliberate. The West, for all its wealth and technology, cannot match the spiritual discipline that keeps India's democratic heart beating, because democracy in India is not just political, it is personal, it is cultural. It is sacred, and when that sacred institution is backed by a rising economy, a growing technological edge, a rejuvenated military, and a confident population, the result is a democratic juggernaut, one that doesn't need to conquer others to prove itself, one that doesn't export its values through force, but radiates them through example. That's the kind of democracy that is dangerous, not because it seeks war, but because it shows the world another way to win. Dictatorships are predictable. They react to threat with violence. They collapse when power is removed. But disciplined democracies evolve. They absorb shocks, shift gears, and bounce back stronger. India has faced colonialism, partition, terrorism, economic crises, and political instability, but it stands, not just because of leadership, but because of its people's resilience. Because a democracy built on 5,000 years of cultural continuity cannot be shaken by 5 minutes of global disapproval. This is the power the West struggles to comprehend, a free people who don't beg for acceptance, a diverse population that doesn't disintegrate, a political system that is messy but mighty, and when such a system becomes confident in its own identity, it becomes a threat to the old order, not a threat of war, but of example. A quiet challenge to the idea that only one kind of democracy works, a living rebuttal to the myth that discipline requires dictatorship. So while the West spends resources defending its systems, India simply lives its truth. And that truth is not declared, it is demonstrated every day in every state, in every dialect, in every village and every city. Democracy with discipline becomes not just governance, it becomes a movement. A force that expands not through invasion, but inspiration. And that force, once awakened, cannot be contained by any superpower. In the architecture of global dominance, the West has long relied on its systems. Systems of finance, systems of governance, systems of education, systems of information control. These are precise, efficient, and structured mechanisms that allow Western powers to project influence across continents. But while these systems are impressive, they are also mechanical, built by logic, maintained by control, and vulnerable to disruption. They can be hacked, boycotted, exposed, or replaced. India, on the other hand, draws its strength from something the West cannot replicate, program, or suppress, the soul of a civilization. Systems organize a nation, but soul animates it, and India's soul has been alive for thousands of years, pulsing through temples and texts, through festivals and philosophies, through struggles and stories. It is a soul that has faced fire but never burned, that has tasted subjugation but never surrendered. It is not located in policy papers or government archives. It is found in the eyes of sages, in the hands of farmers, in the voices of mothers, in the chants of monks, in the art of its painters, and in the wisdom of its elders. It is intangible yet undeniable, and it is this soul that makes India undefeatable. The West is brilliant at exporting systems. It offers financial models, legal structures, military frameworks, digital standards. But these tools, when transplanted without roots, often fail to flourish. India doesn't need to borrow its identity, it births it from within. While others look to external validation, India turns inward to its heritage. That inner journey has given it something systems cannot: resilience. Resilience not just to survive crises, but to emerge stronger from them. Every time the world thought India would collapse, it didn't. When it was partitioned, it persevered. When famine struck, it fed itself. When terrorism hit, it stood taller. When sanctions came, it innovated. When predictions of chaos surfaced, order emerged from within. This isn't just a story of governance. It's the soul of a people who refuse to be defined by foreign forecasts. Because while the West relies on data, India trusts in Dharma, its timeless code of righteous purpose. Systems are built for stability, but souls are built for storms, and India's soul has been forged in centuries of upheaval. Invaders came and went, empires rose and fell, ideologies tried to erase it, but India's essence endured. It absorbed what served it, discarded what didn't, and outlasted every attempt to replace its identity. That's a kind of power the West doesn't fully understand, because it's not taught in strategy schools. It's lived through suffering, sacrifice, and spiritual clarity. Even today, the West seeks to influence India through systems, through trade policies, tech platforms, educational exchanges, international media. But India does not bend to systems that do not resonate with its spirit. It adapts, but it doesn't adopt blindly. That selective integration is not arrogance. It's awareness. Awareness that not all progress is packaged in silicon. Some of it comes in silence. Not all knowledge is in textbooks. Some of it is in traditions. Not all strength is shown in statistics. Some of it flows through sacred rivers, through community ties, through ancient chants that still echo with power. India's soul expresses itself in more ways than the West can measure. It's in how families stay together across generations, in how even the poorest carry a sense of dignity and devotion, in how the country pauses not for political events, but for spiritual ones, in how its festivals are not just holidays, but expressions of cosmic truths. The West builds from outside and India builds from inside out, and that inward strength cannot be colonized. This doesn't mean India rejects systems. On the contrary, it is mastering them, digitally, economically, militarily. But it is doing so while remaining anchored in its own values. It is not copying the West. It is collaborating with wisdom. It takes technology, but applies it through local genius. It uses global finance, but governs with cultural discipline. It engages in global forums, but speaks in its own voice. That dual mastery of modern tools and ancient truths is India's greatest asset. It doesn't have to choose between tradition and transformation. It embodies both. The West often believes that its systems guarantee its superiority, but systems are only as strong as the spirit that runs them. When the spirit decays, systems become prisons. India's spirit, however, is not decaying. It is rising, not with aggression, but with awareness, not by conquering others, but by awakening itself. And that kind of rise cannot be stopped by policies, sanctions, alliances, or criticism, because it is not rising to compete. It is rising to complete its destiny. India's soul teaches it patience. The West often rushes to act, to intervene, to dominate. India waits, watches, prepares, and then moves with purpose. Its victories are not always visible, but they are always vital. Its development is not always loud, but it is lasting. Its confidence is not arrogant, it is ancestral. That kind of power unnerves the West, because it cannot be mapped, managed, or manipulated. In a world of systems, soul becomes the ultimate disruptor. And India, with its ancient soul and modern mind, is the disruptor the world didn't expect, but now must reckon with. It doesn't seek revenge, it seeks realization. It doesn't impose, it inspires. And when a nation moves from survival to self-realization, there is no force on earth that can stop it. Not because it overthrows others, but because it finally stands fully as itself. The greatest weapon of any empire is not the army. It's the illusion that the conquered need to be saved, that they are incomplete, that their way is primitive, that their systems are outdated, that their culture is less refined, that their spirituality is irrelevant. This illusion has shaped centuries of conquest, not with swords alone, but with stories. The West has always succeeded best when it convinced others to be ashamed of themselves, and that's why India has always been its most frustrating opponent. Because India, even in its weakest hour, never truly believed the lie. It was wounded, yes, confused perhaps, but never fully colonized in spirit. Because India had already conquered something the West never understood itself. When a nation conquers itself, it becomes indomitable. Conquering yourself means knowing your flaws and still loving your identity. It means seeing your contradictions and still holding your core intact. It means navigating chaos without losing clarity. India has done this for centuries. It has wrestled with caste, poverty, division, foreign rule, internal corruption. And still it rises. Not because these problems disappeared, but because they didn't define it. They refined it. Because when you've already survived yourself, no one else's judgment can defeat you. The West's greatest strategy has always been internal fragmentation. Divide and conquer, but how do you divide what has already embraced its complexity? India is not afraid of contradiction. It doesn't pretend to be one thing. It is many things. It doesn't collapse under diversity. It thrives in it. It is a tapestry of languages, cuisines, gods, climates, ideologies, and all of them coexist in a sometimes messy, always miraculous unity. That unity is not perfection. It is permission to be human, evolving, unresolved, but deeply rooted. When India was colonized, it lost territory, it lost treasure, but it never lost its essence. The West tried to teach it about religion, not realizing it had already birthed the world's deepest spiritual paths. The West tried to educate it about philosophy, not realizing India had been asking the eternal questions long before Plato ever spoke. The West tried to civilize it, not realizing India had cities, art, science, and social systems when much of the world was still tribal. That kind of memory is not erased by colonization. It is only buried temporarily. And now it is being unearthed again. India doesn't need to become anything new, it needs to remember what it always was. This remembrance is the true revolution. The realization that modernity is not the enemy of tradition. That progress doesn't mean westernization. That technology can coexist with spirituality. That 1 billion people don't need to fit one model to move forward. This realization is the most powerful act of self-conquest. Because once you stop trying to become someone else, no one else can control who you are. The West is built on conquest, land, markets, culture, ideology, but India is built on liberation. Its deepest texts speak of moksha, of freedom from illusion, ego, and limitation. That pursuit makes it not just a nation of people, but a civilization of seekers. Seekers who may get lost, but always return. Seekers who may suffer, but never forget. Seekers who may fall behind in global metrics, but leap ahead in human meaning. To colonize something is to overwrite its story, but India's story is too vast to be overwritten. It is not just written in history books. It is sung in bhajans, danced in classical forms, prayed in ancient languages, sculpted in timeless stone. It is whispered in grandmother stories, carried in holy rivers, guarded in the silence of sages. You cannot colonize what continues to create itself anew every day from within. Even as India adopts modern tools, it does not abandon ancient truth. A colonized mind would copy without context, but India adapts with discernment. It doesn't use AI to replace the soul. It uses it to empower the mind. It doesn't digitize to forget. It digitizes to preserve. That ability to evolve without erasing is a sign of true self-mastery. The West copies success. India contemplates meaning, and in a world drowning in information, that depth is a kind of dominion no empire can understand. Empires collapse not when they are invaded, but when their people lose purpose. But India's purpose has never been imposed. It has been inherited. Even now, as it becomes a global economic and military power, it is not seeking to dominate others. It is seeking to fulfill its role as Vishwaguru, not in arrogance, but in alignment with its destiny. And a nation walking in purpose cannot be trapped by pressure. This is what the West cannot defeat. Not the missiles, not the markets, but the meaning. A civilization that has conquered its shame, reclaimed its narrative, and reconnected with its inner compass is a force beyond fear. Because fear is the seed of control. And India has moved past it, past the need for validation, past the obsession with comparison, past the trauma of colonization. It stands now not in reaction, but in realization. India has already done what many powerful nations never will. It has looked in the mirror, faced its past, embraced its flaws, honored its ancestors, challenged its leaders, and still chosen to rise. Not with revenge, but with responsibility. Not with noise, but with knowing. Not to conquer others, but to complete itself. And once a nation is complete within, the world cannot conquer it without. That is why India cannot be defeated, because it already won the only war that ever mattered, the war within.